Hey everyone, my name's Patrick, and today I wanted to share a little bit with you about my experience doing the death race back in 2008. It was a long time ago. 2008, that was, how many years ago? 12 years ago. I was 25. Yeah, I would have been 25 at the time. So many of you have heard of the death race. Maybe some of you out there haven't heard about it. It's a pretty tough race. How it all started is a friend of mine sent me an email and he told me about this really cool challenge. He said it was going to be like an overnight race. I thought that sounded pretty interesting. He said it was in Vermont. It was kind of new. They'd only done it 1 year before, back in 2007. And he said that year only like 8 people or 7 people did the race. And there probably wouldn't be a lot more this year, but it sounded like a lot of fun. A buddy of his knew some guys in Vermont that were interested in doing it. And so we were all going to go down there and do it together. And so I signed up, and then I started getting emails. And very quickly I realized these emails, in a sense, the race had already started because there was all this kind of mental warfare going on. But the emails, they'd send you things like, here's a list of mandatory equipment that you have to bring, but you may never need during the race. And then we get another email, and it would say, here's a list of optional equipment that you might bring, you might not bring, but you're probably going to need it. And then we get another email saying, whatever equipment you do bring, you have to carry with you the entire race. And then one day we got an email where it said, and you're going to be required to bring an egg. And I think that's all it said. I can't remember if it said an uncooked egg, but an egg in its shell. And so we kept getting more and more emails, and in the email signature, as the different guys were signing the email signature, it would say, don't break your egg. So in this little community of racers, we're emailing each other back and forth. I'm talking to my friend who, we're trying to figure out what's this egg thing about. So we all kind of figured out that we're probably going to have to carry our egg with us the entire race. So everyone started building these contraptions to protect their egg. And no joke, my container was so amazing, putting my egg inside. I could throw it up in the air and it would hit the ground and my egg would be intact. That's how amazing my container was. But anyways, during this time, I'm training. I have no idea what I'm getting myself into. All I know, it's a 24-hour race. Well, overnight. It's an endurance challenge, and there's going to be probably some different challenges along the way. And so I'm running, I'm doing strength training, and I'm seeing what some of the other guys are doing. So I got a little crazy. I started just crawling for long distances on my belly, crawling through creeks, climbing up things, all kinds of just strange stuff. But there was really no way to totally prepare. So I basically just focused on strength and endurance training. Well, anyways, the day finally rolls around, and we had to check in at this little, it was in Pittsfield, Vermont. We had to check in. There's a little country store there. We had to check in there, and we checked in at 6 p.m. And really, the race wasn't supposed to start until 4 a.m. the next morning, but at 6 p.m. the race started. None of us knew that, but it started. It's so wild. But we had to do this, video footage where they're rolling the camera, and we had to read our death waiver into the camera. And again, kind of all mental warfare kind of stuff. And then at the end of our check-in meeting, they said, "Hey guys, you need to hand your eggs in. We're actually just making you breakfast tomorrow." And we said, "Oh, that's great." So we handed in all our containers. They kept our containers and took our eggs. And then they said, "And here's another egg." So they took our containers, took our eggs. And they said, we hopefully brought all your gear with you. We're going to do a few pre-tests just to make sure you're physically capable of doing this race. So we grabbed our gear and we took off, and we didn't get back until about 3:15 a.m. And what were we doing during that time? Well, we went on this long hike. We're going up mountains, down mountains, up more mountains, down mountains, going through mud, going through ditches. And so we got back at and the whole time they're like, "Hey, we're almost done. We want to make sure we get you back get some good rest. By the way, my friends and I, we were staying in a barn. That's where we were sleeping. It was really cool. But they kept saying that the whole time, like, hey, we want to make sure we get you guys back in time to get you plenty of rest. We got an early start time. So anyways, we get back at, it might have been 3 a.m. It was either 3 or 3:15. So we finally get back. And they said, okay, guys, make sure you get some shut-eye. Race is going to start at 4 a.m. and you need to be there by 3:30 just because that's when check-in starts. Oh my gosh. So I closed my eyes. I tried to get a little bit of sleep. And then got my gear on, got all my other gear that I had, and we had to get a bucket, and we had to carry 25% of our body weight in sand in this bucket. So we had to get that weighed. Had all my gear on. I had a hatchet, a handsaw, chiseling tools, some first aid stuff. Golly, what else I have? Flashlight, headlamp. I mean, I had a bunch of stuff. Well, we check in, we get our bucket of sand, and then the race started. And we're oh my gosh, that morning, it was the night before. That's right. It wasn't. Yeah, it hadn't started. The race hadn't officially started yet. The night before, we had to do all these things like mixing cement with our hands, making a foundation with the cement, crawling through thorns. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff. But anyways, finally, the race started at 4 a.m. officially, and we set out. We're crawling under this barbed wire, and there's about 38 of us crawling under this barbed wire for a long time, and then going up this mound. And this mound had a cross at the top of it, which will play a big part of the story later on. And then we go down this mound. We're still crawling. Oh, and the night before, we were crawling through areas that we knocked down, and it was an area of like high weeds and thorns. And so I got all cut up the night before. So, as I'm telling you this, I'm like, why did I do this race? Like, why did I just quit right then and there? But something, I just wanted to go. I kept going. And then we're off onto the rest of the course. And so we're going through creeks, following some trails. The whole course for the death race was very poorly marked. The race organizers intentionally did that. And we made our way to this creek. We banged a left, and we were just going down this creek. And it's really hard for me to judge how many miles we were going. I'm going to say it was a couple of miles through this creek. Of course, you weren't allowed out of the creek, and the creek is maybe knee deep, maybe waist deep at points, and it's over these. It wasn't sandy. That would have made things so much easier, but it was just this rocky bottom. So you're just constantly slipping on these rocks, and it's dark, of course. So I did figure out my bucket. I could just leave it in the water, and I just kind of floated it along, which was really nice. And of course, they warned us that they're going to be doing check-ins, making sure we had all our gear, making sure the gear we started with, we didn't ditch any of it, making sure you've got your bucket, you didn't spill any of the sand. And of course, we got our eggs in our backpack as well. And don't break your egg or you're disqualified from the race. So we finally get to our first task, and it's chiseling. And now the guy judging us, I guess he was just judging very poorly, but I soon discovered I didn't have to chisel. I mean, I was chiseling for a while, had this piece of marble, and we had to carve out I think it was your race number or your bib number. And I ended up just kind of scratching it really quickly, which took quite a while, and finally got permission to leave, and we're back down the creek, and we're on to our next challenge. Now, this is where my brain starts getting really fuzzy, and I can't remember everything because there was just so much. But I remember we were hiking for a really, really long time through the creek, and I think the next station, again, it was 4 or 5, maybe 6 miles through this creek, and again, feet slipping every which direction, and we had to submerge ourselves in the creek, and we had to get out, and they made us, I think we had to roll ourselves through sand or something. And then you had to make a random selection. You drew a number, and then you got a log. And whatever you had in your, I can't remember if it was my pack. Oh, no, they provided hand saws. And you had to saw through a series of logs. And I think we might have even gotten just one big log, and you had to saw it into 4 sections. And I got the luck of the draw. I did not get a huge one, and it seemed like it was kind of soft wood. And I ended up sawing this thing by hand and finally got it sawed through. And my buddy that was with me, Jared, he did not get the luck of the draw. He had this big log, and looking back, I probably should have helped him. I don't know if we could have done that or not, but I ended up kind of laying down while I was waiting for him and just resting. And then we went off to our next station, which I think, if my memory is right, we're going down this road, and of course volunteers along the way were asking them, hey, when's the next challenge? When's the next station? And they're like, oh yeah, it's just a mile ahead, just a mile ahead. And of course they were instructed, I believe, to give us instructions very poorly. But we finally got to, I think it was like a sheep stall or a goat stall, and we had to dig out manure and fill buckets up, and we had to do, I think it was 100 buckets. And you're dumping it into this, climbing up this ladder, dumping it in, going back down, filling it up, climbing up, dumping it back in. Well, we finally make our way back to the main headquarters, and there's a lot more for us left to do. There was wood chopping. And again, I can't remember the exact amount, but we had a pile of logs, and we had to chop this wood until it was all split. And of course, I got food in my pack. I'm eating this whole race. I'm drinking lots. I think the night before, my friend Jared and I got a whole pizza. We ate a whole pizza. I don't recommend doing that the night before, but that's what we did. But eventually, we got all this wood chop, and then it came our next task. And this was one of the more challenging tasks of the race, is we had to build a cross, this huge, massive cross. And you had to lash it together. And I can't remember if we nailed it together, but I think we lashed it together. And we had to carry it up this ravine. And this ravine, it wasn't just a ravine, but it was like, there were like waterfalls and there was a creek. And you had to stay in this creek ravine going up this mountain to the top. We had to make it up to the top of this mountain. If you've seen the mountains in Pittsfield, I mean, these aren't, this is not the Rockies, but these are big mountains. And this was so tough. And again, we got all our gear with us. And my buddy and I, Jared, we're slipping everywhere. We're falling down. This way and that, getting scraped up, and we're taking our cross. Oh, and by the way, this whole time we've been led to believe that the finish of this race is at the top of this mountain. And I'm sure I've left some stuff out of this, but we've been led to believe that our race is going to be done at the top of the mountain. And I'm carrying this big cross up. Jared's carrying his cross up, and we finally make it to the top. And all the race competitors that are left, and some guys had dropped out because they'd gotten lost in the trails, and other guys had quit. And we get to the top, and we've been led to believe that this is the finish. And we had to plant our crosses on top of this mountain. I don't know why there's all these Christian overtones, but we had to plant our crosses at the top, so they're all vertical. So you had to dig a hole, plant the cross in, and put it back. And everyone's kind of sitting down around this little I don't know if it's a campfire, but we were all sitting in a circle. And the race director, who is, you probably know who I'm going to say, Joe DeSena, the Joe DeSena, and he's like, guys, man, you're doing great. I just, when I look at you guys, you're just, some fierce competitors. And he's really laying it on thick, being a little patronizing. And the other guy, Andy, at the time, was the other race director, organizer. He's eating this big, delicious sandwich, and he's like, wiping a little bit of mustard off his mouth. Guys, oh man, you're really knocking it out of the park. And he said, hey, we want to give everyone an option. If you want to be done with this race, because you're not done, you've got to go get your body weight in rocks, several miles that way, or a few miles that way, and your body weight in water, a few miles that way. But if you want to be done, we've got a van. We just radioed in a van. They're on their way, and you can hop in the van. And you can, go back to the end of the mountain, bottom of the mountain. No big deal at all. And no joke, everyone quit at that time. And to be honest, I don't fault them for that. The race was incredibly poorly organized, intentionally. The volunteers were incredibly unhelpful, intentionally. The race was incredibly dangerous, intentionally. And, I don't fault any of those guys for that. What kept me going? To be honest, I really don't know. I didn't have this fierce, I'm going to finish no matter what. I didn't have that. I just said, my buddy looked at me and he said, hey, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to say, yeah, I don't blame you. I think I'm going to keep going. And I think maybe in some past blog posts, I kind of portrayed it as this was this heroic moment for me. It really wasn't. I have no idea why I kept going. I just did. But it is kind of cool. I'm not mentioned by name, but in two of Joe DeSena's books, Spartan Up, and then I think it's SpartanFIT, he actually talks at least several paragraphs about this death race, and I was in that group of guys, which was really cool. It's kind of a little claim to fame I have. But seriously, looking back, I think if I was wiser, I would have just stopped. because I'll tell you what, the hardest part of the race was what happened after. And something really, really bad happened after the race, and it was a really close call, which I'll tell you about at the end. But I decided to keep going, so I started walking down to get these rocks. Apparently there was this kind of a little quarry of rocks. We're supposed to load up and take as many trips back up to get our body weight in rocks. But something happened. Again, the course was poorly marked. I'm walking my way down the mountain, and I never saw it. So I get to the bottom of the mountain, and I end up at a wedding, what looks like a wedding reception. And I am covered in mud. I have no shirt on at this point. I've got my pack, close to me. Flies are buzzing around me because I stink so bad. And this beautiful young woman walks up to me, which I think was the wedding planner. And she walks up to me. She's like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm doing this thing called the death race, and I think I'm lost." And she goes, "Oh, that's my Joe." It ended up being Joe's wife. And I guess she was in charge of weddings. They have like a wedding facility on their property, or what was their property. And she said, "Let me give him a call." And again, I was so fortunate at this moment. I had so many fortunate things that happened to me in this race like this, where she called Joe, and they actually sent a guy out to me to point me back in the right direction. I can't believe that happened. So I asked for directions, and he pointed me back up the right direction, and I got back on course, found the rocks, brought my first load. I had lost weight for this race, so I dropped down to about 161, 162. So I got about 80 pounds of rocks, weighed them, dropped them off, and I had to go back down the mountain, and I got another 80 pounds. And I mean, at this moment, I am just like barely moving along, as I got 80 pounds of rocks on my back, in my backpack, carrying my arms. And I mean, I'm just going like just inch by inch. And all of a sudden I hear this voice, and he's like, "You got this, man. You got this. I know you're struggling, but you totally got this." And it was Joe DeSena, right on my back. And he's like, "Hey, let's do this together. Come on, you got this." And he's like, "Even if you're at going at a snail's pace, just keep putting one foot on the front of the other and don't stop, no matter what." And I mean, there was this one point in the trail where it gets real steep. It's a very short section. And I mean, my quads and hamstrings were screaming. Something I forgot to mention is my quads and hamstrings started cramping up a couple of hours before this moment. And I was just praying. It's when I got on the way down, when I started getting lost, that my hamstrings and quads started cramping up here and there. Not big cramps, but they were about to get big cramps. And I started praying like, "Jesus, help me, please." I started thinking of my brother, who's a former Army Ranger, some of the stuff he's been through. I'm like, this is nothing. This race really doesn't mean anything. Just God help me to finish this thing. And then I got Joe DeSena barking in my ear, which was pretty awesome. And I'm doing it snail's pace. I'm just going inch by inch. I'm not stopping. And I'm seriously taking steps this big, and I just keep working my way up the mountain. And at some point, Joe just kind of made me feel like just at ease, and like this tension kind of dropped out of my body. And Joe and I ended up having this great conversation. And I said, "Hey, why the crosses? like, I'm a Christian. I want to know, why'd you guys use crosses in this race?" And he goes, "We look at Jesus as the ultimate endurance athlete." I was like, all right, cool. And we ended up having this great conversation about Jesus. I don't remember everything I said to Joe, but I thought that was an interesting perspective. And I'm like, yeah, like I can totally see that. Anyone who faces death and comes back from the grave, resurrected, I'm going to follow that man. I'm going to respect and admire him. I'm going to surrender my life to him. I don't know if Joe has or not. I hope he has. So we continue along along our way up the mountain. I finally make it up, and Joe, end up leaving me to go do something else, and I start my journey to get my body weight in water. What ended up, they were exaggerating. I didn't have to get my body weight in water, but I had to get 2 buckets full. Something I forgot, they've been inspecting our eggs all along, and my egg was still intact. Anyways, I got two bucketfuls, moving along, and I can't remember if it was Joe or another race official, but they brought my egg out to look at it, and he just kind of crunched it in his hand. And I went, "What?" And again, I think it was like this mental toughness thing where I've been protecting this thing with my life, being so careful and cautious with every step, and then he crushed it. And he said, "Don't worry about, I'll let everyone know that I broke your egg." So again, I get my water, and I'm crawling through these these pipes, these water pipes. And on one, it was going down, so I just kind of slid down. And of course, I had to fill up my buckets, and so I had 2 buckets, all my gear, and I'm walking back to the top of the mountain again. And I finally make it back. They weigh my water. I didn't spill any. I'm good to go. And I'm making my way down the mountain again. And all of a sudden, it's dark at this point, and Joe DeSena is right there, and we're running down the mountain. I don't know how I'm doing this, running down the mountain. And we finally get back to almost the beginning. I'm crawling through pipes, crawling up this mountain, crawling under the barbed wire. And I finished, got to the end of the race, and they put a hammer in my hand, and it says, death race. I think I ended up selling a hammer in a garage race or something, and they put it in my hand, and I was done. And I was one of 8 people that finished the death race, which is pretty cool. But what happened after, this is just scary. Again, I can't remember the exact time. It was like, I think it took me 32 hours to finish, from 6 p.m. until when I finished. I think it might have been 11 p.m., it might have been midnight or 1 a.m., but I had to drive back to, my friend and I were staying at another guy's house, and so I had like a half an hour or 25-minute, 45-minute drive ahead of me, and I totally fell asleep at the wheel. And this is another moment in this day where God had me, but I woke up, I was driving off of the road, and at the nose of my car was on this big steep curve, really sharp, steep curve, and I kept driving straight. I woke up and was somehow able to jerk it back over, and there weren't any cars coming towards me. I mean, I was so fortunate, and it took everything in me to stay awake, and I finally made it home, and I felt like death the next morning. But yeah, that's my story, 2008 death race. Hopefully that was entertaining to you. If you have any questions about how I prepared for that, what I did to survive that, I left out a ton of details. Feel free to comment or to shoot me an email. It was a really, really cool experience, one that I love thinking about and talking about. But I think this is the most extensive I've ever shared with anybody out there. So hopefully you enjoyed that. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.